So now we're going to be moving into our discussion of the Baroque. There's going to be three phases of the Baroque: Italian, which of course we're discussing here first, Dutch, and then French. So we'll be moving through each of those types, might we say, of Baroque. So the stylistic commonalities, of course, will be the same between the three, but obviously they're going to be happening in different regions. So we'll start here with Italy, move into Dutch, and then finally end with French. So a map again for you. This is a map you've seen of Italy prior. So again, just to give you a little bit of context about where we are and the geographical location. Of course, you can see the Kingdom of France right over to the top left. And then if you go northwards, directly from Italy, of course, you'd run into the Dutch territories. So again, we'll be visiting there soon. So what is Baroque? You can make an art history pun and say, if it's not Baroque, you shouldn't fix it. Horrible jokes. I got tons. Tons of puns, right? But the Baroque literally comes from the Italian word barocco, which means misshapen pearl. Now, what the heck, right? Baroque, it's this idea of something beautiful, but something eccentric, I think, right? Something that's a tad bit different. So the idea of a pearl being very beautiful, but if it's misshapen, then there's a sort of quirkiness to it or an oddity to it. So I think the Baroque is saying, we want to do something a little bit different than what's been coming before, but beauty is still going to drive us, right? We want it to look nice. What I really look at is, at the key of Baroque is this idea of it kind of shifting away from what Renaissance art held true. And this leads to a more important, larger point, right? Which is, you'll notice in art history, especially from the Renaissance onward, that what we see with movements, as we now call them, art movements, because we move a little bit away from time periods. Renaissance really, to me, is like kind of the last time period. And then you move more into like movements, mannerism, Baroque, right? Romanticism, etc. It's more of an artistic movement, might we say. But what we notice is that each movement tends to do the opposite of the movement that came before. So where the Renaissance, to me, was all about rationality, order, right? Having rules to follow, right? Something like linear perspective to me is a set of rules that help you create a composition or create an art piece. There's a sense of order. And then you'll notice mannerism was like, no, let's throw that out the window, and kind of try to break those rules. And the Baroque says, okay, we don't want to be what the Renaissance was anymore. Let's go in the opposite direction. So what does that mean? It means that you have artwork that instead of being very still and quiet, it has a lot of drama and theatricality, right? It has a lot of energy and motion. It has a lot of contrasts, right? So where, again, to me, the Renaissance is all about order, the expected. Here, Baroque to me is about shaking things up, right? Having something that's unexpected. So again, for me, when I look at the work, I always see it has this sort of dramatic angle to it. It's very theatrical. I almost feel like some of the pieces look like they're taking place on a theater stage, as if you're sort of looking up on a theater stage and watching the action transpire. They're very energetic pieces. A lot of the compositions are in motion. They're moving. And then I see a lot of use of the contrast of light and dark here. So we'll talk a bit about using light and dark, or what we call chiaroscuro, in compositions and how that plays out as well. The final thing I'll mention is, as we go through the course, one of the things I note is that religious art starts to become less important as each movement goes on. So in the Renaissance, you still had a very Catholic Italy. So you're still going to have a lot of religious art. You move into the Baroque, you see a little bit more of a secular attitude coming forth. And secular basically just means non-religious. So you see more of that coming to the forefront. And again, with each movement after this, I notice less and less that religion is really driving what art is about, or even what culture is about. So keep this in mind as far as subject matter as we move forward. The first artist I want to show you is one of the best sculptural examples of Italian Baroque, and that is the artist Bernini. And as I mentioned before, I was going to show you three Davids. So you've seen Donatello's David, you've seen Michelangelo's David, and now you're seeing Bernini's version. And note that it really is a Baroque David: energy, motion, drama, theatricality. You are in the midst of the action with this Bernini. So with Michelangelo's, you're at the beginning of the narrative, nothing's happened yet. And with Donatello's, you're at the conclusion of the story. Here, you are smack dab in the middle, right? You are in the middle of the action. And thinking about a sculptor who can take a piece of marble and make it about energy it's really just a compliment to Bernini to say that he was able to make something so active, so energetic, to create the limbs moving away from the bulk of the marble. Marble's very breakable, so he had a lot of skill and technique in creating a piece like this that is in the midst of energy and motion. And I love how it's almost like we're stopped in the action, but we want it to conclude, we want it to move forward. And that's the brilliance of the Baroque to me. It's about you wanting the statue to keep moving, or to keep, right, sort of completing, right, the action, the energy that it has. And of course, you know, art history is all about comparing and contrasting to a certain degree. I brought up the fact that each movement kind of does the opposite of the one before. So you can now think about Michelangelo, that very static, still, contemplative, Renaissance expression, and compare it to, and contrast it to the Bernini, which is the opposite of that. Another thing I want to mention is, notice that David is aged up again once more here, where with Donatello's he was very youthful, Michelangelo's he got older and more mature, and finally with Bernini's David we kind of see like a mature man as the subject. So each of these artists has a different vision, right, of what they're doing with the David subject matter and how they're going to let that play out. So the David's probably one of Bernini's most famous, and again, I love how it just shows you in the plainest terms possible what Baroque energy and action is really about. Here's another of his pieces, Apollo and Daphne, using a pagan theme. So I've tried to, you know, kind of talk to you a little bit about like paganism being reborn. So here you see another example of like a pagan subject. And in this story, Daphne basically was being pursued by Apollo and basically begged the gods for help. And I always joke with the Greek gods, you got to be careful what you ask for, because they turned her into a tree. I don't really think that's what she meant by help me. But, you know, again, you got to be specific with the Greek gods. So you'll notice her arms are turning into like branches and her body's kind of turning into the trunk of the tree. So she's metamorphosizing before our eyes as Apollo's still running after her. And again, if you think about all of the energetic action here, all the limbs extending in various directions, and how he manages to capture it like a snapshot in marble, it's pretty darn amazing, I think. The final piece I want to show you is the Ecstasy of St. Teresa. And one of the reasons I like telling you about this one is I think it helps you think a little bit about the overall idea of drama in Baroque sculpture, where this piece is actually situated, you'll notice, in the Church of San Vittoria in Rome. And the way it's situated in the church, it's below this skylight with these gold metal bars that make it look like sunbeams coming down. And when the sun is shining, you get this like rays of sunlight that are coming down right into the sort of little cloister it's in, illuminating the statues. So the setting is very theatrical, the piece is very theatrical, everything kind of works together to create a theatrical idea, right, of this piece. What is the story? Saint Teresa was a nun who was famous for her visions. So she was said to have visions, both auditory and visual, right? And she wrote about these visions, and you can read her writing. So if you're interested, you can go and look at the literary source. So Bernini was playing off the literary source and kind of manifesting the idea of her experiences into a physical sculpture. As part of her vision, she writes about how she saw an angel with a flaming arrow. So if you look at the piece, you'll notice angel, flaming arrow, who came to her and pierced her breast with the flaming arrow. And as it pierced her breast, she said she was overcome with like the love of God, the light of God. Again, you can think about this metaphorically. You can think about it, as it's stated, however you would like to deal with that, sort of the faith-based assumption of what she's saying here. But what Bernini does is try to take that story and make it manifest. So we get this angel, and notice the movement of the garments, right? It's almost the idea of like this divine wind, right? This energetic look to the piece as the angel lifts her garment and is about to pierce her breast with the flaming arrow. And ecstasy, I like how Bernini, he kind of takes the idea of ecstasy and makes it something like, you're sort of like, oh, is he going there with it? Maybe. But, I think he's just trying to play into that drama that Baroque art is really well known for. And to be really clear, nuns considered themselves mystical brides of Christ. Some of them even wore wedding bands on their hands to imply that they were mystical brides of Christ, that they were married to God, in a sense. So this idea of ecstaticness, right, they're like, this is the only ecstasy, quote unquote, that I will experience. Nuns are celibate, they don't have sex. So this idea of perhaps Bernini was trying to use the drama of this idea of ecstasy as kind of a double entendre or a double meaning, but implying in a sense that, their nuns are committed to God. That is their ecstatic love, right, is the love of God. And what I also, again, wanted to really make clear is, again, the setting of this piece. Talked about the skylight and the rays coming down. But also what I love is you have this architectural setting around it that really sets the piece on a stage. And then you'll notice to the right and to the left are little sculptural representations of the patrons of the work, which were the Cornaro family. So remember, patrons pay for artworks, they commission it. So here the Cornaros, what I love, Bernini actually sculpted them as if they were in like little theater boxes. If you've ever been to the theater and looked up, you'll notice that these little boxes that are usually for the wealthier people, the wealthier patrons. They're set up above the floor of the theater. So he gives them these little theater boxes in a sense, and then carves these little sculptures of the family as if they're watching a show. You'll notice that they're gesturing and they're talking to each other as if they would be at the theater, right, gesturing and talking to one another. So again, it's this little tiny detail that amps up that theatricality and again almost feels like you're watching something on a theater stage, right? So he plays into that very, very much. And the next artist I'm going to talk to you about, which is Caravaggio, also to me plays into that idea of being on a theater stage.